Hey everyone, this is my presentation on the three ecosystems that we visited throughout the past few weeks. This is the overview of the pine flatwoods, scrub, and hardwood hammock ecosystems that we visited with the class. And these are some preview images of my favorite animals that we found. So the first one we're going to go over is the pine flatwoods, which we went to Regional Preserve Hal Scott. And this is a photo of a beautiful longleaf pine that I really like. So the pine flatwoods landscape is flat, has sandy terrain with nutrient-poor soils. It has scattered slash or longleaf pines to form a very, very open canopy. A very dense saw palmetto and shrub understory. It is, of course, a fire-dependent ecosystem, and it has seasonally wet depressions interrupting the otherwise dry flats, which we saw during our time at the park. There were some areas that were completely flooded and other ones that were completely dry. The first animal that we're going to go over is the wingless meadow katydid. It is the only species in its genus in the US, so you can call it, I guess, regionally monotypic. And they're called wingless, not because they lack wings, but because their wings are incredibly short. They, in fact, hide under the pronotum, which is an area behind the head. So on this katydid, that wing is probably less than a centimeter long. So it's safe to say they don't fly. They don't really get around by flying. They just jump around. Next one is the palmetto tortoise beetle, which is a pretty common species in scrub and pine flatwoods ecosystems. They're commonly seen on saw palmetto, but they also feed on cabbage palm, dwarf palmetto, and scrub palmetto. Their larvae, interestingly enough, create this really cool shell with their own feces called a fecal thatch. And it serves as protection against the elements and predation from particularly stink bugs, which love to go after these guys apparently. And on the bottom here is a photo of an adult I took around 2 years ago, actually in the UCF ARB. And the photo at the top is of the actual larva that I photographed in house caught. The yellowneck caterpillar moth was a really cool find. When they are disturbed, they make this strange U shape. I'm not sure why. It didn't really deter me. It actually made me more interested in the animal, but I guess it works, right? They are also polyphagous, so they feed on many hardwood trees, including oaks, willows, maples. I've seen them on apple trees. They have quite a diverse host range, and they could quite literally eat any hardwood tree, basically in the ecosystem. The next animal is the pine woods tree frog, Hyla femeralis. It is a native tree frog widely distributed throughout the southeast, and they are pretty variable in coloration. I've seen them green, brown, and gray, and they can even be a little reddish apparently. And unfortunately, they're likely in competition with invasive Cuban tree frogs, which is just another reason to remove Cuban tree frogs whenever you see them. Um, and I've doubled up here on the plants. This is Florida pennyroyal, the first one. And it belongs to a monotypic genus, which is always very interesting. Monotypic means that it is the only species in its genus. And it mostly occurs in Peninsular Florida, but it's also known to inhabit parts of Georgia and the Bahamas. Pretty big range, but nothing compared to the gallberry, which ranges from Nova Scotia all the way down to South Florida, which is an insane range, spans thousands of miles. And it is the gallberry, of course, is one of the more typical scrub flatwoods plants. And it's also known as the Appalachian tea and inkberry. Cool names. The dwarf live oak is also known as the runner oak, and it typically grows 2 to 3 feet, but it can get a lot taller in certain situations. And hence its name, it spreads via underground rhizomes. So it forms these dense mats and colonies, so basically copies of itself. And the second plant here is vanilla leaf. It's also called deer's tongue. I'm guessing because of how it looks. Um, and the species name, interestingly, means most fragrant, and it refers to the vanilla-like scent that is released when the leaves are crushed. Partridge pea is an annual legume native to most of the eastern US, and its reproduction is really unique. It's one of these plants that sort of sprays its seed in a spiral formation. I'm sure you guys have seen many videos of this, and it's this is called explosive dehiscence. I hope I'm not butchering that, but that's how I sound that out. Really cool plant. The second plant right here is the rose rush. Has a very cute little weevil on it. One of my favorite finds of the ecosystem. And the rose rush basically occurs in dry, sandy soils, basically in flatwoods, scrub, sandhills, pine barrens, and it prefers disturbed areas within these ecosystems, which is interesting. And in parts of South Florida, it's also listed as a rare species of conservation concern. And this weevil right here, it belongs, I for the life of me could not identify the species, but it belongs to a genus of weevils called flower weevils. And lo and behold, it was on a flower, a very pretty one. Finally, we have the longleaf pine. This is a tree that once dominated the entire southeastern United States, around 90 million acres, and it's now been reduced to less than 5% of its historic range, unfortunately. Longleaf pine ecosystems support one of the highest levels of species richness in North America's temperate zones, which is incredibly interesting. I had no idea. And it supports, of course, very important species like indigo snakes, the red cockaded woodpecker we learned all about, and the gopher tortoise, of course. The second ecosystem is scrub. This was at the Lionia Preserve, probably my favorite of all the ecosystems that we visited, and definitely one of my favorite parks that I've ever been to. Really, really cool system. Found some really cool animals here. And this is the soil here is dry, well drained. It is infertile and it is mostly sandy. Um, it is very sparse in its canopy, if any at all. Usually, I mean, when we walked in, there was basically no canopy um, to the preserve, and it's most of its vegetation resides in the shrub layer with the palmettos and rosemaries. The first animal is the restless bush katydid. It's a flightless cricket. Its forewings are present but don't support flight. Um, so these guys have basically evolved to just jump around, and they can get around. I tried to take a really close macro photo of one, and it jumped basically into my face, which I didn't appreciate, but that's what I get for trying to get close, huh? The mating of these guys is really unusual. Sometimes the females will chew on a male's forewing to access seminal glands during mating, which is unique in Orthoptera. I've never heard of that happening. And something really interesting that I observed that I haven't found any articles written about was that these guys tend to inhabit these clumps with two-striped walking sticks, and they could have a commensalistic style relationship with them. Could be due to their acid spraying abilities that the walking stick have. Or maybe it's because they just smell a certain way, or they could even be eating their frass. But either way, they appear to have this relationship with walking sticks, and that could potentially be a field note or an entire research project for anyone interested in that. The Florida scrub jay had to include the Florida scrub jay, one of the coolest birds I've ever seen, and that's saying a lot because I'm from Miami and we get a lot of cool birds down there. It is endemic to Florida scrub ecosystems and they rarely move far from their territory where they hatch. And unfortunately, they are listed as threatened with an estimated population of 7 to 10,000 individuals, um, which is more than I would have thought, but still not enough. And they are just incredibly friendly, beautiful birds, as you can see by the photo down here. Um, these guys were jumping on our heads, and I got a really cool shot of one eating a nut that was slightly out of focus, so I decided to use this one instead. But really, really cool birds. The six-line race runner, one of my favorite reptiles, probably in Florida, even though I've never been able to actually catch one because they're incredibly fast, as I'm sure most of you guys figured out by trying to take photos of them. They're diurnal and they're very active. They basically bask, forage, and dart across the ground. incredibly fast lizards. They are insectivorous, meaning they only eat insects and arthropods, and they are among the fastest reptiles in North America. And they sprint at up to 18 miles per hour, which is insane for a lizard species. Absolutely insane. The cactus choroid bug is a species of leaf-footed bug that primarily feeds on prickly pear cacti. And the photo on the top is one that I took with the camera, and the one on the bottom is something that I use my macro lens for. It is of the nymph of this species, and the nymphs often feed in groups of colonies, which is how I encountered these guys. There was around six or seven probably that were feeding on the outer parts of the cactus, which is really cool. And these two I decided to clump together because they're both robber fly species. Megaphorus minutus is a species I'm very familiar with. I've encountered it a couple times in the UCF ARB and has no common name, but its range includes the southeastern coastal plains. And it is also the most common species of its genus in Florida, with the other species being much larger, much rarer, and with a different coloration in its legs, which is how I was able to identify the species. The next one is the short-striped hanging thief, and really interesting genus. They're called hanging thieves because of their habit to dangle by their front legs while feeding. So they'll basically hold onto a twig like they're doing a pull-up, and then use their bottom pairs of legs to hold the animal, whatever they've caught, whether it be a wasp or a fly or a beetle, and they will basically suck the juices out of it while they hang from this twig in that pull-up position. Really interesting genus of flies there. For the flora, we have Exobasidium ferruginidae. Exobasidium ferruginiae. Hope I haven't butchered that, but I likely have. It is a fungus in the genus Exobasidium, and they are typically plant parasites, this genus, and they produce galls associated with hypertrophied or abnormally enlarged flowers on the rusty staggerbush. So this fungus is a specialist on the rusty staggerbush. And you wouldn't assume by looking at it that it's a fungus. I thought it was a genus of maybe gall wasps or something that was doing that, but no, it's a fungus. Meresmus is a genus of fungus that I was not able to identify further because I did not take a photo of its gills, but many of these species can dry out completely and then revive when rehydrated, almost like a resurrection fern. And a few of these species are eaten, although they are really small, tough, and not really worth eating. You could confuse them with more poisonous species. Really not worth it. These two lichen species are both in the genus Cladonia. And the main difference that I noticed was that the jester lichen, or the British soldier lichen, as Dr. Cladden likes to call them, um, they have these fruiting bodies at their tips, which are a bright red. They look really, really cool. Very, very nice genus of lichen. Um, Astraeus morgani is a species of false Earth star. It is found from central to southern US, extending far into Mexico. And interestingly, it was described only recently in 2013. Um, Xanthoconium is a genus of fungi. Um, Not very interesting, but it does form a symbiosis with trees, especially oaks and pines. And lastly, we have Exudoporus floridanus. Uh, Given its name, you would assume, rightfully so, that it's a Florida endemic. And it's another bolete fungus like the last one. And the name Exoporus refers to the droplets or exudates that often appear on the porous surface of the mushroom. The last ecosystem is the hardwood hammock. We entered through Bar Street Trailhead, which is an incredible little trailhead that I had never been to before. The landscape, so it has a dense canopy of evergreen and semi-deciduous hardwood trees, multi-layer vegetation with a shaded understory, a lot of shade in this ecosystem, and it is situated on slight elevations called hammocks surrounding wetlands. And the soil is moist, well-drained, sandy loam or marl. and the landscape often appears as dark or shady islands of forest, which is really gloomy, has a sort of mysterious look. The first animal is the southern toad. These are very common. They are found across the southeast, and their distinguishing feature is a prominent cranial crest ending in large knobs behind the eyes. And they are considered common, but local populations are rapidly declining because of urbanization in Florida. It's unfortunate. This is probably my favorite find of the hardwood hammock. These are predatory fungus gnats that I was only able to identify to a family. But a lot of these worms are bioluminescent and they spin this silk or this gooey thread that they use to capture prey. And they're usually living in caves, tree holes, soil cavities, or in this case, under a rotting log, which is an interesting place to find them. But in Florida, that's probably the most common area that they are in. And in this photo, there are three. And then at the bottom there, I included a macro photo that I got of one a couple years ago. That one was also taken in the UCF Arboretum. This next animal is a wheel bug. Didn't find the actual animal, but I found a bunch of its eggs, and they're easily distinguishable, these eggs. And this is a photo of an adult wheel bug that I found a couple years ago, actually. This was actually at Hal Scott. Um, really cool animals. Tramedes is a genus of fungus. They are often cryptic, so I was not able to ID this guy further. Golden reishi is a really common species of fungus. I've seen a lot of them, and they're distinguished by this varnished reddish brown cap with a yellowish to golden margin, which is all these features are present in this photo, so I'm very confident in that ID that it is a golden reishi. Ludwigia is a genus of plants, very diverse in Florida. I was not able to ID it further, but they are ecosystem engineers, which is really interesting. They alter hydrology because they are aquatic plants, and they reduce oxygen levels in water and outcompete native plants. Iridipsoponus is a genus of fungi that like to spawn on hardwood trees, and they are wood decaying fungus. They are white rotters, which means they're capable of breaking down the lignin, and they leave this fibrous, pale wood behind after they're done. Bertlegill, this genus of fungi is incredibly hard to identify the species, so I was comfortable leaving it at the genus level. Amanita, if any of you are familiar with psychedelics, this is a very infamous species or genus of fungi. 50 of them are very toxic, but the rest are psychedelic, and a lot of them form symbiosis with trees, which again is very interesting. And Exodoporus floridanus is another bolete fungus, um, and it is a Florida endemic, and it is restricted to Florida and tied to oak habitats. That's it.